Good evening. Welcome to The Pressure Point. I'm your host, Barbara Anderson, and tonight we continue our series called Profiles of Faith. And our special guest tonight is a good friend of mine, a retired United Church lay minister, Bill Bell. Welcome, Bill, from Lillooet, BC, and Ma Murray territory. Welcome to The Pressure Point. It's good to have you here.
Good to be with you, Barbara, and with all these young fellows around here I've known for some time too.
And the crew members.
Makes it a lot easier, yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's good to have you here, as I said. We just want to talk tonight about spirituality, about prayer, and so on. And well, I'd like to start off, first of all, Bill, some of our viewers who know you and who may have just heard that now might have detected a slight accent. And you were born and raised in England.
That's right, yeah.
Durham County?
Glad you said slight.
Yes, you've been here for quite a while now,
Yeah,
so you
yeah.
probably had a lot of it worn off. What were some of the formative events of your faith in those years that helped you to develop your sense of spirituality?
Well, I suppose that we started out at home and in a Baptist family, in a Baptist church, and our childhood was just based around the church all the time. Just about every part of our living was in the church.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, the worship, but not all, and Sunday school, but nearly all our social activities were around within the church. Even soccer games and cricket games, they were all within the church community, and so that was where we started from, and it was a big strength, I think. And then when I joined the Air Force in '38, beginning of '38, and then went to continue going to church and when I was in the church, and I went to Bedford, and I went to a Baptist church there. It was my first time away from home, but at this Baptist church I was made so welcome, so made to feel so at home, that this really, spoke to me in the sense that this is what it's about. This is what life's about. I suppose I probably didn't think of it in those terms, mm-hmm. but there was something that spoke to me because I had been accepted and as one of the people and as one of the family. And out of that experience came the decision to be baptized, to seek baptism in the Baptist church.
And in the Baptist church, it's an adult immersion?
Yeah, a baptism through immersion, yeah.
And the Baptist Church in England, as in other parts of the world, is a non-conformist, would you say,
yeah.
church, in that they have different tenets of how one lives a Christian lifestyle, different from, say, the Anglican Church or the Church of England at the time?
There are variations, yeah. Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah, mm-hmm.
yeah. Okay, we start off, you said you joined the Air Force. Then where did you go? What was your first career, as it were, after that? Did you leave the Air Force after the war years, or?
Yeah, well, I left the Air Force. I was trained in the Air Force as a in Britain, of course, it was called wireless operator. We'd call it radio operator over mm-hmm. here, and that's where the basis of my training in electronics. And I continued that, and after I came out of the Air Force, and have worked in the electronic field for many years.
Did you work, you mentioned earlier that you worked in guided missiles.
Yeah, this was one of the jobs I went to after I got out of the Air Force. I was working for Bristol Airplane Company in the development of guided missiles. And it was from Bristol, actually, I left to come to Canada.
So why did you leave that particular job or career to come to Canada?
Oh, that's a different story, and I don't think we need to take too long to get into that one mm-hmm. tonight. But let me put it this way, that many years before, for some way we had got an urge to go to Canada, but then during the war that had dropped, and after the war it resurfaced, so we came to Canada. Mm-hmm.
So, okay, you come over to Canada. Let's go a step a little farther ahead then, if you don't want to deal with those years. What brought you into the lay ministry? When did you hear that call?
I think from about the age of 18, 19 or 20, around that way, I've sort of had an urge to express my understandings anyway of spirituality from the pulpit. And I never really contemplated getting into becoming a minister. But in Clare's home, Alberta, it was there that I sort of did. Well, it grew. It grew because in the sector plan, many of our United Church people will know what the sector plan was. It's a stewardship program. And on the time talent card, it comes along in that in order for us to make our commitment. There was a handwritten line on the bottom of it saying will be available this fall a course for lay preaching, and which would be held in Calgary. And it stood out to me, and I said, "Hey, that's for me," you know. And I talked to the minister, Jim Roberts, and we sat down, had a good old visit on that, and he encouraged me, and so then we went ahead. But out of that experience, and coming from that, people in the congregation would keep saying to me and to my wife at that time, my wife Lee, "Hey, you're going into ministry." Of course, that wasn't our intention then. All I was seeking to do was to be able to fill in at different congregations when a minister was away, and periodically in that way, as a supply. But anyway, out of that grew this. Out of this grew the sort of the sense of call, the sense of need to be into the ministry full, and one look at it. But it didn't seem possible. I mean, I had my own business then, and I just couldn't see any way out of that and into the ministry. And we talked it over with the minister, and so I just left it and left it. I think one day I just sort of sat down and I said to him, "God, if that's what you want, show me the way." And I left it at that. And within 2 years, and without going into some other details, within 2 years, the way had opened up for us to move in, and the easiest, what seemed to me that probably the easiest and maybe the best way into the ministry was as a lay supply.
So you chose to go into lay ministry rather than ordered ministry. Was there any reason behind that decision, Bill?
I suppose an urge within myself to get about the task, and I felt that I'd done so much reading of not only the Christian faith, but tremendous amount of reading in the Eastern religions, which had helped to develop my sense of spirituality. And I had developed an understanding of death and dying, and I wanted to share this. I wanted to be able to share this with people, and so that as I was getting on in years then, and to give up 4 to 6 years university, said, well, if I'm acceptable as a lay supply, why not? It'd be better to go on and minister to people.
And use that time.
Let's
just go back to, you talked about your sense of spirituality coming from both Christianity and Eastern, your understanding of Eastern religions.
Oh, yeah.
What is your sense of spirituality? How do you define that? What is spirituality to you?
Of course, it's difficult to define it in sense that, a dictionary way of doing it. But I think I have to start with with what the book of Genesis says, where God created the world, and the story in Genesis says that God created man and woman in His own image, and of course we know that God is spirit, and so that the image God created us in is that of spirit, and so that makes the spiritual part of us the real part. This physical body is but temporary, and it's our spiritual nature which is the reality of living.
Well, how would, for instance, a non-Christian approach that? I mean, how would you differentiate spirituality from Christian spirituality? Maybe what you've defined is a Christian spirituality. Is there a spiritual being in everyone, and how do they seek out that relationship with God?
I believe so. I believe, you know, totally believe that we are all spiritual beings. We're all children of God. God created each one of us in His own image. But the difficulty is that for various reasons, some people don't develop that awareness of their spirituality, you see, and so that it's developing, and that seems to be the task of living, is to develop that awareness of our spirituality, our real relationship with God.
Does it matter which direction we take to develop that awareness, do you think?
I don't think so. I think I designed a stained glass window for the church in Lillooet. And part of that design has 4 paths leading up to the cross. And what I'm trying to say in that window is there are many paths, but then it comes up to the cross, but there's one way. And I don't, but the 4 paths to indicate that there are many pathways to God.
And each person may take a different route,
that
but arrive at the
route
same
can be different, and
destination.
not only can it be Christian, it can be Buddhist, Hinduism. For after all, we are what we are largely because of the culture we've been brought up in, where we have been born. If I'd been born in India, I'd have been either Buddhist or Hindu. Eh? And surely God is, we're all children of God. And God seeks to has revealed Himself to these various cultures in a ways appropriate to the culture and to the way of living.
That brings up communication with God from within our cultural experience. And in the Christian context, we call it prayer. What is prayer to you, or how should we use prayer as Christians?
Well, I believe prayer to be communication with God. And whenever I think of prayer, or whenever I'm talking about prayer to people, I always come back to Paul's injunction to pray without ceasing. Now, obviously, Paul wasn't anticipating everybody standing with their hands together praying to God, talking to God, telling Him what to do.
Right.
So what's Paul thinking about there? And I think the reality of that came to me when, I guess it was really when I was in Claire's home, or in the earlier part of my time in Canada, when I found myself, when I'm at my workbench fixing TVs or radios, when I'm out driving my vehicle, wherever I might be and whatever I might be doing, I was conscious of God. And so that whatever I did was done with that awareness that God was around.
So it's that consciousness of God.
So it's consciousness, really consciousness of God, I think, which is that prayer without ceasing, being constantly aware and seeking to know, to understand what He or God would have us do.
Rather than presenting a list of things that you want God to do.
Oh yeah. I think that's one of our weaknesses which has developed over the years, is that we think so often of prayer of talking to God. A lot of the time asking, sort of telling God what to do. But it seems to me that prayer is basically seeking to find out from God what He would have us do. and how that we should live our lives. You know, Barbara, my bent or my approach to, for a better way of expression, say the religious life, is that of a mystic.
Mm-hmm. What do you mean by that?
The sense, developing that sense of oneness with God, and the realization that in order that we're going to find God within ourselves, within our own soul.
Sense of the mystery of God, is that included in that?
Of course, it's in the, of course, because God is always a mystery. God is always a mystery, and we only get glimpses of what that mystery is.
Can you identify some of the areas in your ministry where you were able to bring that experience to help others, that kind of mystical experience, or that sense of spirituality that would really touch other people's lives?
Well, I will try to, Barbara, and I think before I do that, let me say that it's out of that consciousness of God, I think that we can develop our sense of caring for each other, our loving nature. That comes out of that relationship with God. And I remember being called by a family to go and visit a lady in hospital who was dying of cancer. And they said to me, look, will you go see our mother? She cannot get any rest. She cannot sleep. She knows that she is dying, and she can't get any, can't come to terms with it.
Filled with anxiety.
And the doctors have not been able to get her to enable her to sleep at all. Mm. So that is because she cannot sleep in, and that is also deteriorating her condition. So, okay, so I went to see her, and of course I'd known her some time before, long time before, and so we got on fine. And when I went in, the family were there, but as soon as I went in, the family went out. And so often, that I think that is important when a minister is going to visit with a patient. The family can help by just removing themselves, allow that closer one-to-one relationship of a patient. Anyway, this lady she was, tending to weep a bit, and couldn't understand. So I talked with her about, tried to talk with her about dying and what I understood death to be, and I also read to her the 23rd Psalm, and I sat with her, and just sat quietly, never after that, and held her hand, and just sat and tried to share my loving feeling and that, and eventually she went to sleep. And so I sat and waited for, must have sat there for an hour and a half, or maybe longer, I can't remember. But then I just gradually withdrew without disturbing her. It was either a day or 2 or 3 days later. One of the doctors stopped me on the street. He said, Bill, I don't know what you did, but that lady has never had so much rest for a long time. No. You obviously had something that we don't have.
Isn't that amazing? You were able to touch.
And I think, and I believe that there's a sense of compassion and caring, which the doctors have, but in the spiritual nature, I think, is much stronger there.
And to read some of the words of comfort, I guess, that come from the scripture too.
Oh, I think that's a big effect, yeah.
Well, that was a kind of a healing ministry that you provided there for that woman. And I think of some of our mainline churches who seem to have lost touch with the healing ministry of the Holy Spirit, if you will. Why is that, do you think, or how can they regain it? What is your opinion of that?
I remember when it was got back into Claresholm. I guess a lot came from out of that kind of Claresholm. But I remember just sitting, I think I was lying on the couch one day, and just about all my spare time is thinking about God and about that relationship. I guess I just lying on the couch, and it just came to me that the Christian ministry is a healing ministry, totally a healing ministry. It's a healing of the soul, but not only a healing of the soul, but a healing of the physical body too. After all, Jesus spent most of, if we go through the Gospels, we find that Jesus spent most of his time healing the sick. And unfortunately, and then after that, the apostles did the same thing, a lot of healing of the sick. But over the years, we've lost that. And I think partly because we've had a lack of trust, a lack of confidence that we can be that instrument, and we're only the instruments for the transference of God's power.
Have we assigned that role to our doctors, the medical establishment, too much, do you think? I mean, people do talk about psychosomatic healing and the fact that many people have been healed in the spirit and their bodies.
We're coming back to it. We're coming back to it. But I think there's separation from it, or there's lack of interest or lack of interest in healing started long before the doctors really have the place that they have today. And I think but there is to a certain extent that the church in its early years started out totally as a healing ministry. And but we have over the years passed that over to the medical profession.
There are also people who have abused that and have, and have made many others suspect.
That's right. Yeah, certainly does. That is one of the. I suppose that's one of the dangers, but that happens in all walks of life.
So we mustn't be afraid of that, even though there are people who abuse it. We still have to consider it as
I think
an important ministry.
I think the church has a mission to do more research as to what enables healing to occur, because sometimes it doesn't.
Yeah, that's
and of course, that may be God's will, saying, "Hey, this is not the time." But I'm not sure about that. In my deep within me, I believe that it's God's will to heal. Always.
So we need to be looking at what the direction is, or finding out that through prayer, perhaps, and
through prayer. Prayer, of course, is a basis of that, and Jesus emphasized that. Remember when they came down from the Transfiguration, and then the disciples had tried to heal a young man who, some of the scriptures quoted as epileptic, but he had kind of seizures, and Jesus admonished him. He said, "This can only be healed through prayer." Yeah. But we have to be careful of what we mean by prayer. And prayer is that relationship with God that enables God's power to be translated and transformed through us.
So would you talk about a healing ministry with laying on of hands and so on?
Oh, yes. Mm-hmm. Oh, yes.
Is that
it's certainly that's one of the ways of transmitting God's power through. Mm-hmm.
Well, let's just go on a little bit. You mentioned that a lot of your spare time was taken up in thinking about God, and you are also a scholar of Carl Jung. And how have you integrated that with your faith or your spirituality, the teachings of Jung?
Well, that again has to go back to my early years of reading really a lot of the Eastern religions in conjunction with the Christian books, and some of the older texts that are available. I find them very helpful and very revealing. But anyway, in reading of the Eastern religions, I found an awareness of Christ or Christus, and they talk about the God consciousness and the Christ consciousness, and then how that is part of our own being. you know, our conscience. And then out of that, somewhere, and I can't pinpoint it, but somewhere in that, all my reading there, that I came to the conclusion that the real self within us, the real real person which God created and which is God, is within each one of us. And of course this seemed so way out. It's a kind of thing you can't, in those days you just couldn't talk about with anybody else. You'd be, you know, laughed out. Anyway, when I did get the opportunity to go to VST, it was first year of VST, I think, and there was a course, course on Jungian things, and it was Bob Becker who was teaching that, and in his he was explaining how Jung had come to in his understanding of the Christ, and he said that that the Christ is that part of God within us, the real self within us, which is buried deep down in the soul, and so very few of us ever get to know that real self, the real potential that God has given to each one of us. And I said, hey, it's just really the same kind of conclusion I'd come to in my own thinking. Made me feel good that a man like Carl Jung had come to the same conclusion I had, but and then through a different route. But he had come to that also from a lot of study in various religions of the world. And
it raises all kinds of questions of dying to self and asking Christ into your heart, and if Christ is already there and how that works out.
That's right, yeah.
Questions
but of course, the dying to self is not the talking about the real self, which is the Christ within us. Dying to self is the dying to self-centeredness, dying to the ego,
the material,
the I. And then it's only when we can die to that self-centeredness, then we can come to an understanding of that real self which is within us, the real Christ, the real God.
That's really interesting. I'd love to pursue that more, but our time is up. I really appreciate you joining us tonight and sharing those thoughts with us, Bill. And we want to thank you for joining us on The Pressure Point. Good evening, and God bless.
Thank you.